have hopefully a summary and conclusion to the extended work that you all have done on the marijuana related businesses and the land use associated with those. So that's really our agenda today. As Commissioner Gastos just mentioned, happy to at the end as well cover briefly the items that you will have in front of you for hearing next Tuesday evening. So with that, just wanted to do, well, let me pause there and see, Chairman, if there's anything else that you might like to add, and then we can jump into the access control plan.
Nope, that sounds great.
Tamara, this is Ken. For some reason, it took a little while to get hooked up here, so I might have missed this, but I'm a little unclear as to why we didn't finish this task at the last public meeting, and we're taking it up again here in a workshop.
Yeah, Commissioner Scissors, Chairman Teskey, happy to address that. And that was actually going to be part of my introduction to the topic today. So I will hit that here immediately. So as you know, and from the meeting on the 9th, this was the sole agenda item at that point in time. And the access control plan, we had requested the staff level had be continued until next Tuesday, the 23rd, for the hearing. The real drive on that was a workshop that was held previous to the 9th. I believe it was also on the 1st of February, where the item was, or the plan was reviewed with our city council. And many of the city councilors expressed a fair bit of concern and consternation around the amount and extent of public comment and public engagement that had been conducted as part of the planning process. And so the direction from council was not necessarily to delay hearing the item. The item is scheduled for their March, I think 1st, but Trent can correct me if that date's wrong, hearing. They wanted to keep that schedule on track, but did want kind of over that 30-day period of time, additional public outreach. So at the staff level, we have been doing that extensively the last couple weeks, and we wanted to make sure that as the Planning Commission heard this item, that you had the full extent of public comment and perspective that is lent to the process through that additional comments. And we certainly have received a number of comments and engaged directly with other groups and entities on the plan process. So certainly wanted to have that body of information and testimony as part of your consideration for the plan. So that was really the premise, to extend from the 9th to the 23rd to make sure you could hear from those that were interested in this topic. And let me pause there and ask Commissioner Scissors if you've got questions on that, or I will do a brief introduction of the other staff and turn it over to them.
No, that was great. Thank you. I kind of suspected that, but I just wasn't sure. So will the majority of what we talk about be the new information that's coming from that public outreach?
Yes, that is correct, Commissioner Scissors. So with that, like I said, I know that most of the planning commissioners had seen this at the December 3rd workshop, but we wanted to refresh on what the topic is, what an access control plan is, and then certainly highlight some of the comments and concerns that have been heard throughout the plan and help you understand the process for addressing those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Trent Prawl, our Public Works Director, and he's got a number of staff as well as our consultant, Stolfus Associates, that has been a significant help in our lead consultant on this project. So with that, Trent, thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Commissioner Teskey and other commissioners. Yeah, as you know, Patterson Road is the lifeline of the north part of town. There, it's been the backbone since we constructed it back in the mid 1980s. The corridor currently serves about 25 to 30,000 cars per day and is projected to be nearing 40,000 by the time here in about 2045. As our community grows, we need to look at different methods to preserve traffic flow and to maintain the safety of the corridor as well. And one of the comprehensive plan principles, principle number 6, discusses efficient and connected transportation. The second goal is about actively managing transportation systems and infrastructure to improve, the reliability, efficiency, and safety, and so forth. Under that goal, there's discussion about the access management as well. So one of those keys to increasing safety and maximizing life of our 4-lane arterial there is through access management. And this is the city's first access control plan completed. All the others here locally have been completed by CDOT, both on Highway 50 and then I-70B from 24 back to 15th Street. The city hired Stolfus & Associates a little over a year ago, and they've been looking at not only the accident history down the corridor, but also projecting out what traffic looks like at the various intersections up and down the corridor. And then, of course, how do we preserve that capacity and traffic? So the study goes from I-70B on the west all the way to about 30 3/4 Road, or Lodgepole Street. But with me today, I'd like to also introduce Michelle Hansen, who is with Stolfus & Associates, and she'll be leading the rest of the presentation here for the most part. But also Rick Doris and Dave Thornton have been very closely involved with the discussions today. So Michelle will have a brief summary of the project, as well as share a couple of the examples where public outreach has helped shape the access control plan.
Great, thanks, Trent. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for providing us some time to talk with you about the access control plan. Bella, might I be able to get permission to share my screen?
Yes, one moment. Okay.
Wonderful. Hopefully you all can see my screen now, as we'll kind of walk through some of the elements of the access control plan. As Trent mentioned, we've been looking at Patterson through the city limits from I-70B to east of 30 Road at Lodgepole Street. As we've looked at this, we have looked at how traffic volumes have increased. We've also considered how your various plans for future connections will work and come into play and affect how Patterson Road works in the future, so that we have a very clear vision of how your whole system works. In looking at the corridor, today there's 283 access points over this 7-mile section. That comes to about 40 access points per mile, which is a pretty large number. It's quite a few accesses within a mile, especially on an arterial level street that carries the type of traffic that we see on Patterson Road. We are expecting traffic to increase, about 33% over the next 20 years. And as we're looking at crashes that are occurring today, 64% of the crashes that are happening on Patterson Road today are occurring at intersections or driveways. So that is why we're really looking to emphasize looking at access and how we can manage access to better improve the safety and efficiency of Patterson Road. Access management is a proven strategy to kind of manage this cycle between transportation and land use. As you built Patterson back in 1984, those are those arterial improvements that you see kind of at the top of this circle. That increased accessibility. We saw a lot of economic development occur, and as that development occurs, traffic volumes increase. And as the traffic volumes increase, that's when we start to see more conflict between vehicles, more accidents, and just an overall deterioration in how the system works. That's the kind of thing that then pushes you into new arterial improvements. What access management does is it comes in at this traffic conflict point, and it starts to reduce the number of conflict points we have so that we can make the system work better, and it starts to extend the life of your system, the system that you have today. So really the purpose of our access control plan is to give the city a roadmap of how to tie development and growth with your transportation system and the needs of the local community, with the intention of proving both safety and then ultimately maximizing the life of your 4-lane section that you have today, so you don't have to take taxpayer money and expand this section. So safety is I think the most critical benefit of this kind of plan, and the benefits that will occur as you start to implement it over time. You can see in the graphic to the right, there's the majority of crashes that occur at intersections and driveways are related to left turn movements. 74%, those are the most accidents we see. They're also the most severe accidents that we see. So by taking a look at things like raised median that will very clearly identify where you can turn left and then make the other two turns along the corridor right turns, we just automatically improve safety because we've reduced the amount of conflict between vehicles. That in turn also makes for smoother traffic flow, right? You have less traffic, slowing down to make these turning movements, and your traffic is just going to move smoother. You're going to have less congestion and less delay along Patterson, which gets back to the ability to kind of maintain and extend the life of that 4-lane section, which really, not only makes traffic work better, but also kind of extends the life of our businesses in a way that they're working today. We don't want to go and start to take slivers of property from each of these property owners to get another lane in. So if we can minimize the amount of right-of-way impacts that we have, our businesses can maximize the use of their space on their site. In addition to that, as we're looking at how traffic is flowing, part of that then relays into the ability to retain a business's market area. What studies have shown is that folks are only willing to drive for so long. It's not as much of a distance thing as it is how much time does it take me to get to the places of business that I patronize. And so if we can keep those travel times down, we can retain more of the original market area. As you start to see congestion happen, you can see in the graphic, you start to see this reduced market area. And so part of access management gives us the ability to try to maintain that original market area for as long as possible. So the access control plan is a long-range planning document. It's not something that is meant to be implemented all at once. And it really is meant to give a roadmap and the ability to tie everything together into a single plan for both staff and property owners along the corridor. So implementation is key, and I want you to keep this in the back of your head as we go through. But the critical things, the triggers of implementing this plan is, number one is property redevelopment. And that means that you're changing the use of your property such that you're increasing traffic to and from the site. So it doesn't mean you're changing ownership. It doesn't mean you're making improvements like adding a garage or repaving your parking lot, those kinds of improvements. It means you're making a change that would increase how much traffic is coming to you. You're adding more residential, or you're changing from a small type business to a larger business, that kind of thing. So that's the number one trigger. The next one is if the city has planned improvements, they can implement portions of this plan. And then finally, if you have safety or operational issues that occur along the corridor that can be solved through access management, that's another place where you're going to want to start to implement portions of the plan. The plan has some very specific details. We identify each and every access in a table and identify what conditions each and every access have for implementation. So there are some that even if you're doing a public project, you're not going to change that access until redevelopment actually occurs. It's also meant to be a living document. So know that if things change, your city staff and elected officials can make those changes that make more sense with the current conditions. So a couple of main principles. Median is the big one. We are looking long-term at Patterson Road meeting the city's principal arterial section, which has a raised median. Raised median does mean that turning movements are restricted and only right movements in and out will be provided. So a piece to this is making sure we can get people turned around either at intersections, through U-turns or through circulation on your local street system, those types of things, that's all been taken into consideration. The 3/4 movement you see at the bottom is a tool we use to provide a little more access without adding signals to your system. So allowing the left turns into a property or onto a public street, but restricting either the through movements or the left turns from the local streets. You can see here in this graphic that we really can achieve a lot in terms of conflicts between vehicles with access management techniques like this. So your traditional intersection that's full movement has 32 potential conflict points between vehicles. You can see just by changing to 3/4 movement and eliminating that left turn out, we've already taken 32 down to 8. And if we go even further and go to right and right out, we take that down to 4. So we're just making very specific decisions about where left turns can be made and making sure that circulation can occur for the right to turn movements. So initially we sat down with staff to talk about what do we really want to try to get out of this access control plan. The top 2 are efficient travel on Patterson and effective access to our businesses and residences. And that is a balancing act. We talked a lot about circulation. So making sure that this plan works with the proposed local street system and the existing local street system. We've identified a few more connections with this plan, but generally your master circulation plan already has a lot of that in plan and in place now. We want to make sure we're supporting alternative modes. Certainly by reducing access, we also make the corridor safer for pedestrians and bicycles, and that has been a consideration. And we want to make sure you can do this in phases. This can't be a big, humongous project. That funding just doesn't work that way. And also the needs along the corridor don't match up with that. So we want you to be able to implement this as changes occur and make sure that it's compatible with what you've already been planning to date. So as we look at why do you need to do this access control plan? We put together this little comparison, and Rick Doris, he is working on a daily basis with property owners and developers as they come in already on implementing access management along Patterson Road and many other corridors in in your city. But he's restricted by the fact that he can only look at them one at a time as they come in front of him. And he's trying to make the best decisions he can. But what this plan really does is it allows us to look at the corridor as a whole and how different access points affect each other. We get to tie the land use and the transportation together in the plan. And really, it gives you just that roadmap of what do you want to do. So everybody's on the same page from the get-go. Rick doesn't have to figure out what to do because we've already worked through that and how circulation works and how access restrictions might be implemented. And so not only does Rick know what to do, but also all your property owners have a clear view. If they want to make a change on the corridor, this is what the expectation is for access. So I'm going to jump in and give you a few little examples. We certainly, if you have some spots in the corridor you want to talk to, we'll open that up here later. But as you look at the plan, the green circles are signalized intersections. The triangles are those 3/4 movements that we talked about where you can make left turns in. The stars are right in, right outs. And any X's are closures. We've also looked at how to share access between properties as land use changes. And so you can see that with these orange and blue arrows. And we have a lot of that occurring in the corridor already today, which is great. So this first example I wanted to share with you really was a piece where we had some input from the public and a couple of business owners that we found really valuable, and we were able to take it and then apply it across the board through the entire plan. But basically, you know, as we get close to intersections, we're trying to utilize the side streets as much as possible for access and try to keep a lot of access really close to the intersection. And so, you know, 34, 33, and 37, ultimately, as land use changes, we'd like those access points to be moved to the side road and for those access points to be closed on Patterson Road. But businesses like gas stations here at Access 37, you know, circulation on site is really important. And so we made it very clear that their access point 37 would be right in, right out with any kind of public project, but for it to close, it's conditional upon the land use changing. So any property where we found that the circulation on site or the way their property is working today cannot be changed unless the land use changes, we made conditional right in, right out, with closure only occurring with redevelopment. Another location we did a lot of outreach on and worked very closely with St. Mary's Hospital was this space around 86, 86A, and 93 that you see at the bottom here. You know, Access 93 today provides access to the hospital. We have talking with emergency services and the hospital. There's already during peak hours difficulties being able to make that left turn, and that's mostly due to the fact that it's just located a little bit too close to 7th to make it work. And so ideally, we need to move that a little farther away from the signalized intersection. And ideally, we also want to provide left turn access for as many properties as we possibly can. So what the plan proposes is that we would move 86, we would move the left turn movement from 93 to 86A. 86A would be a 3/4 movement. And then we would make a connection between the Mira Vista residents and the hospital, so that both communities could utilize that left turn in movement. And then ultimately, long term, the access at 86 and 93 would potentially close. Now, talking with the hospital, we found out, 93 is also used for a lot of their truck movements. And so we've made it very clear that 93 can't close until their truck movements and the ability to get to the loading dock can be accommodated in a different way. So this connection kind of provides that ability to keep the left turn movements to as many folks as possible, and provide a safe way to get to both Mira Vista and the hospital. We also spent some time with the Northeast Christian Church. I know from their comments recently, they still have a little bit of consternation, but I think we have tried to kind of maximize the ability to provide them as much access as possible in a safe manner, given how 27.5 Road connects with Patterson. So, ideally we would make 27.5 Road a 4-legged intersection. We have that in the plan here as a possibility. Unfortunately, there's a big utility complex located right at that location that will be fairly costly to move. So we have it as a possibility because there may be somebody someday, as you redevelop this area, that is willing to make that change. But we recognize that it's difficult. And so we worked with the Northeast Christian Church to try to get them a left turn movement in. So you can see access 148. That would provide them the ability to get their folks in coming from the east, and would allow them to turn left into the site. We then also worked with them to make a connection down to Wellington long term, which will then allow them to get out to 15th Street. So in addition to this, they also have the ability to make the right turns out and do U-turns at a couple of nearby either 3/4 movements or up at 28. So I think we've tried to kind of maximize the ability of this southern part across from 27.5 Road and give as much flexibility to the property owners and the city to kind of maximize that access ability at this location. Another spot we heard a lot of reaction to at our open house back in October was at 28 Road. This location at 28 is located just a little too close to 28.25 to make a signalized intersection work and for the traffic flow to work with the signals so close together. So without a signal, left turn movements start to become very difficult. There have been some crashes, more severe crashes at that location that really over time need to be addressed. So we identified 28 Road as a 3/4 movement long term, and the residents were a little concerned about how will I get out? How can I make a left turn out? And the good news is that the city already had that plan in place. There's a 2021 project that's going to connect Hawthorne to 28.25. And that's going to allow people to make the connection over to 28.25 and get to a signal to make the left turn movements. And we got a lot of good reaction from that. People felt very comfortable with that, and we're happy to hear that connection would be made. I think this is my last example for you. We're looking at 12th Street here. And this is something that you guys already worked through when City Market came in to develop. We applied a 3/4 movement at that location. That's how that works today, so that people can turn directly into the city market. And while ideally in terms of spacing, it's a little close to 12th Street, when we look at the traffic operations at this location, if we were to make that the city market access right in, right out, and push all the left turn movements to 12th Street, it blows up that intersection where we just can't make it work. And so this is an example where the 3/4 movements really provide us some relief at our signalized intersections so that operations can work a little better. And in the plan is kept as a 3/4 movement there. So ultimately, our plan that we have today, it's going to provide a significant number of safety benefits over time, with a 60% reduction in those conflict points that we talked about, while still being supported by local circulation, which your system really supports nicely with the grid type system that's out there. The access points, again, over time will be reduced from 283 to 160 access points. But this will be in conjunction with changes on the corridor. It won't be all at once and will really be triggered by redevelopment and public projects on the corridor. So as Tamara mentioned, there was some consternation about public involvement, and I just want to kind of walk through this and maybe point out a few things, because I think folks took that 30 people attended our open house in October and think that that's all that occurred, but the city staff has been very good at getting us connected through your GJ Speaks and really reaching out to people virtually as much as possible with some of the complications that COVID-19 has created for us. So, kind of hot off the presses here, we got some information on how people have been using GJ Speaks. And, just from February 9th, from the latest reach out, February 9th and 23rd Planning Commission, there's been 478 new users logging onto GJ Speaks to access the access control plan. And that's in addition to the items that you see here on the slide. We've had quite a few meetings one-on-one with property owners. And there have been quite a few folks that are representing larger groups. For example, we had some folks join us, join us from the Patterson Village Square. One or two property owners actually sat down with us and talked to us, but they were representing a whole host of business owners in that complex. And ultimately, we were able to find a solution that kind of met those needs a little bit better. And so those types of meetings, as well as the types of things where we've been able to apply a concept across the whole corridor, have really helped us to improve and provide a plan that better meets the community's needs. So one more time, just to hit implementation, this is a long-range plan. We're looking to apply it as the conditions on your corridor change. So redevelopment is the first trigger. The second trigger is a public project. And the third one is if you have safety or operational issues. But there's not a plan on the plate for let's just add medians starting tomorrow, and no intention of doing that, but really looking at where your safety and operational needs are and starting to plan for those and identify projects that make sense. So thank you. We're here today. I know we're coming to you again on the 23rd for your planning commission meeting, and then looking to go to city council for adoption on the 3rd. So that's kind of where we're at. We've been actively responding to comments from folks as they come in, and are now open to any questions you might have, either specifically about the plan or the outreach or anything that you'd like more information about.
Hi, this is Keith. I'll jump in here. Does this plan? You mentioned that it does consider a lot of the other developments in circulation. And you had a slide that seemed to show, for example, 30 Road and 29 Road heading up north of I-70 for that potential development in the future. How about the rather significant implications of a 29 Road I-70 interchange, and how that starts to either maybe add or maybe even relieve a lot of the traffic expectations that would come in along Patterson? Because right now, obviously, you can only get to it from the east, the west, or the south, and there's the whole stretch that you're just kind of stuck with. So do all of the data and sort of the foundational statistics of what the traffic growth and the needs are, do those get changed when a 29 Road interchange comes in, and should it impact the plan accordingly?
So that's a great question, Keith, because the 29 Road interchange was a topic of consideration at the onset of this project when we were first talking about it. And we had a lot of conversation internal to our team about, given kind of the long range nature of it and the lack of available funding, and really a plan to get that funding in place, should we be including it or should we not? And ultimately, our project team decided that given we're looking at kind of this 20-year planning period, and we want to get you a plan that kind of meets your conditions in that period, that we took the 29 Road interchange off the plate. We fully recognize that it's continuing into planning stages, and I would say that would be an element that I talked about, in terms of amending the plan. If you guys are getting to the point where, funding is there and you're about ready to build this thing, that might be the point where you might want to just reevaluate and see if there's any major changes that you would want to make to the plan. However, given kind of the period that we see for that, we felt like this plan really needed to address what you had in place in some of the other locations, and make sure that that east-west corridor along Patterson could meet it, even if 29 Road interchange doesn't come into play.
Yeah, and this is Rick Dorff, Commissioner Ellers. Following on to that, looking at the 2045 plan, they modeled it both ways, and the traffic in some areas of Patterson gets a little better with the 29 Road interchange, and in some areas gets a little worse. But regardless of how that might or might not play in, everything that's in this access control plan would be good things to do, even if the traffic, even if 29 Road had a fairly significant change on Patterson. And like Michelle said earlier, access control and trying to get access on side streets, consolidate accesses, get them spaced appropriately, get them away from intersections. That's the stuff we do as development engineers on an everyday basis. So regardless of what the interchange does, this access control plan is still an extremely valuable tool for us.
So you said something there that actually brings a lot of comfort on this particular question and topic. I want to say it back just to make sure I heard it right. And that's that models were done to say if the interchange was put in or not. And ultimately, you might have found some areas where there were some yellow flags, where were green flags, but you really didn't see any huge red flags that said, whoa, 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 this changes everything, and therefore made the decision to move forward under these kind of this foundation of data, right?
Yeah. You know, when we look out at 2045, we do have some problem areas on Patterson, you know, just to be honest. But this plan will do nothing but help those situations out.
The only other question that I had, and I have to preface this question or comment with the data, the engineering, the reasoning, the rationale, all of this is great. I really appreciate the presentation to help understand the why and the how and the impacts that it has. Where I wonder if I may have some concern, and I invite you to talk me off of this ledge of concern, is that this comes at a great expense to someone. And if it comes to all of the business owners or property owners, you know, residential driveways and whatnot, I think that's a different category than some of the businesses and the potential development areas. And my concern stems from not just that easy low-hanging fruit to pick on and say, well, who's going to pay for this and who does it hurt? It comes from the two major changes that we had in the last year in terms of a major fee increase, as well as a comprehensive plan approval. The fee increase goes a significant step towards traffic impact fees and funding that the city would have. And I'm sure inside Trent's mind right now, he's going, it's still not enough. We've all seen the numbers, and I get that. But there are increased fees there that could help go towards these things in one way, shape, or form. And furthermore, we have a comprehensive plan that took some pretty drastic approaches to prohibit, I think is the right word, growth and development in certain areas, because we would then provide the right kinds of incentives for infill and redevelopment. So my concern about this plan is that all of the fundamentals are sound and the plan is there, but it's the language about who pays for it and just a redevelopment or a successful business coming in, triggering these sorts of things. Help me get comfortable with how this meets the goals of the comp plan about providing the right kinds of incentives for redevelopment and infill, and how the additional fees and why that can't be utilized for this, because it's the element of making the individual business, the economic drivers of our community pay for this, that I feel is a little bit siloed when we look at each of those and then this one and just approve them all together without it really being tied in. Thank
you. So Keith, I'll try to tackle that one with maybe some backup support from Tamara in regards to some of the other infill areas and so forth. But in regards to our transportation impact fees, and those are supposed to help enhance, or help provide for capacity enhancing projects, across the city here. And so we realize that on Patterson Road, that an implementation of this will most likely have some cost share components with the adjacent property owners. It may make sense for us to partner with them and extend the median further up and tie into an intersection on one side or the other. But we're still very concerned about overall the capacity on there, and realize that those transportation impact fees and implementation of this plan will help maintain that capacity and that through traffic up and down the corridor, as well as provide for safe access into the various businesses and so forth up and down the corridor. But yeah, as development happens, we'll be taking we have our overall game plan, our master plan now, and then we'll take a look at each particular circumstance whether it's a new restaurant going in west of 24 Road, or new development in between in between 25 and a half and First Street. We'll be looking, closely at that, and then how do we partner together to provide that infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. So, can you answer this? I don't see an expiration date, or at least not an immediate expiration date on this plan. That the data is sound, the growth rates and redevelopment rates along this corridor are not so outrageous that this plan becomes null and void if we don't get it done in the next 3 months or 6 months. And the reason, just to kind of back that up, that I asked that question is because what I'm struggling with the most on recommending approval next Tuesday is the disconnect between the incentives that the comprehensive plan requires in order to function properly for redevelopment and infill not being established, and yet we would be approving a plan like this that puts that onus solely on those that do come in and redevelop or do infill. So it is not the merits and the necessity of the plan, but it is that we haven't connected it and haven't forced leadership to bring forth the right elements that help impose the rest of our comprehensive plan, which this is in direct kinship to, in my opinion. So first question is there an expiration date on this that I'm not familiar with? And is there anything that kind of puts those concerns at bay?
So let me jump in here real quick. So in terms of an expiration date, I would say generally no. When we look at these access control plans, we are looking very much in a long-term sense and realizing that a lot of this often happens with redevelopment, and redevelopment occurs over a very long period of time. That being said, our technical analysis in terms of, the traffic operations piece, it is based on a 20-year planning period. So in terms of, what have we looked at for traffic, that there's a 20-year planning period connected to that. But in terms of looking at access management just across the board, a lot of these things are can be applied very similarly to lots of different types of corridors, and they're meant to be kind of proactive planning pieces to put you in position to know what you want your corridor to look like. And so I have done a whole bunch of these. There's sometimes that I think some of the improvements or recommendations, we might not see them for 30 or 40 years. But the application of the techniques are still the same, regardless of whether you do it today or you do it in 10 years or you do it in 40 years. And it is one of those things that you can continue to look at and tweak depending on how land use is occurring through here. I work with somebody who always says, hey, if Disneyland comes and drops down here in 20 years, you're probably going to want to look at it differently. I don't think Grand Junction and Disneyland are looking to join up together at all, but just a very, kind of eye-opening example of times where you might want to revisit the plan. I guess, and Trent, you can tell me if this isn't quite right for Grand Junction, but I also would say in terms of, connecting it all together with your other planning documents, certainly we've been looking at all your plans. I think that, again, this is just meant to be a roadmap, and these are things that you as a city are already doing with your developers and applying in a way. And so having this access control plan in place just gives you and everybody else an idea of what's expected. And so I personally think you can adopt this plan and still work together to figure out how it works with your incentives, and really start to tie that together. But this plan still, in that time period where you're figuring that out, this plan still provides staff and property owners a very good idea of what's expected in terms of access with, and doesn't, I think it's just another step forward without having to have everything all in place all at once.
So you brought up a good point, and your slides indicated that, what the trigger points are. Okay, great. And then the next bullet points were regarding it can be done with either private and or public funds. Does the plan anywhere, is this where it's called out who does or doesn't pay for it? Or does that happen in other documents, Trent or Rick or whoever?
So at this point, that would happen in a separate document, Commissioner Ellers. That has not been contemplated or fully vetted here at this point as part of this document on who pays and what proportion and so forth. That has not been vetted in this document.
Thanks for clarifying. That's all I had. Thank you.
Chairman Teskey and Commissioner Ellers, maybe if I can just follow up and just reiterate a little bit of what Trent had indicated earlier on, just a couple of questions ago. And Commissioner Ellers, you brought up the question again about this being the sole burden of property owners. And I believe that's not at all what Trent had indicated. I think he did indicate that there would certainly be public participation in elements of this. So I just wanted to perhaps reiterate what Trent had said earlier in the presentation.
Andrea here, and maybe this is just more of a clarifying question, Tamara or Trent, but so going forward, if a new company or somebody's redeveloping, they're gonna have the cost of the development, they're gonna have the TIF fees. Are they gonna see that the TIF fees they're paying directly going into helping with any of this access? Because I know there's been some concern of people saying, I don't see any benefit of these fees in the areas where I'm trying to develop or what I'm doing. Now, granted, that might be their misconception, but it might be a better way for these fees, in a sense, to be sellable to developers or people that we're trying to attract to the area of actually doing some projects. We obviously don't want this to get so cost prohibitive that nothing ever happens or gets done. Can you guys give some clarity around that?
Sure. So in regards to the transportation impact fees, yeah, they are paid by, as development happens, they are paid, but they do go into a more general pot, and they can go for street reconstructions right in front of the business or right in front of the development, or they can be used for the signal down the street. And so they can be used anywhere, and they're not tied to be within a half mile of a particular development. But ideally, yes, those impact fees are going to pay for those more bigger, larger system improvements, not unlike what we are, building out there at 24 and G Road. All the development fees that have been paid or will be paid, out there are going, well, a lot of the fees that have been paid are going into some of the improvements that we are proposing there along 24 Road and G Road right now. But then as more development happens there, well, now the hotspots moved over to a different intersection. And so the fees paid at 24 and G would then go towards improvements, say, on 25 Road in between Patterson and I-70B. And again, like I had shared with Commissioner Ellers, those fees could go towards, some of the median improvements, here along Patterson Road as well. And again, the exact form and breakdown of that partnership with new development is still yet to be determined here.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Ken. Kind of back to the topic of community input. I know even before we had this delay in hearing this because of the council's concerns about public input, I did have one area of public input that came in even before all that, that I was thinking about raising at that meeting, but I'll raise it now. And that has to do with private residences. There were quite a few comments from private residents about concerns that they had, that access to their own driveways was going to be limited and create inconveniences for them, as well as property values. And so when I looked at the data, it looked to me, and just correct me if I misinterpret this, that actually the majority of the access points are private residences, not businesses. Now that may not indicate the number of actual ins and outs per day, because businesses have more, but the actual access points, I think, were more residential than business. But then if you looked at the number of accidents or incidents, there were actually very low percentage in the residents, and they were almost all had to do with businesses. And that probably has to do with the actual gross numbers of cars going in and out at those points. But anyway, it seems like there were a lot of concerns from the residents, and there are a lot of them. And the concerns seem, fairly legitimate to me. So I'm just wondering how, how we're addressing those concerns. Or is there any compensation for those residents or any way to make them feel like they're not kind of getting picked on here?
So Commissioner Scissors, I'll give you an example of two residents that I met with here just, what is today, Tuesday night, and spent about an hour with them. They were just west of St. Mary's on the south side. And yeah, their primary concern was, yes, right there at 73, 75, 76, and 78. And yeah, they were concerned about what this plan meant, long term. They really liked their circular drives with 2 access points and so forth. And then, but one of their concerns was, what happens with redevelopment? Then I lose my accesses or lose a couple of them, so forth. So having that definition of what redevelopment is, it's the 20% threshold that Michelle had mentioned earlier, but then, we also confirmed that, you can add an ADU, you can add a garage, you could add a couple of bedrooms to your house, and that doesn't constitute redevelopment. You can even have a small business, run out of your house, for the one gentleman, and that seemed to allay some of his concerns. He would still love to have a left out long term, but I think he was getting some of the overall safety concerns there. The next business or the next property over was residential, but also had a business component to that. And they get the access control. In fact, they're practicing it today, already with, having her clients drive all the way to the west, don't take a left turn into us, drive all the way to the west, past the First and Patterson signal, take a left into Corner Square, use the roundabout, and then work your way back and make a right turn into their property. But a lot of their concerns were primarily, how do we get our RV, our trailer, in and out of here, especially if at this particular location, you'll see a 3/4 access off to the north there at access point 74. If we need to increase the width of Patterson Road by 10 to 12 feet in order to accommodate that left turn movement, what does that mean for their property? Are they fairly compensated? And some of those concerns. And so that was just a brief example of what I had those discussions with those property owners here Tuesday night out there on site.
Thanks, Trent. I mean, those are some useful examples for sure. Do we have an idea of really what the overall scope of these concerns are? Is this just a few folks that are worried about it, or are the numbers high enough that it needs to be kind of an area that's, you know, really looked at collectively? Since they're so spread out, obviously it's different than like when we have a neighborhood meeting for a development, right? Everybody's all together, but this is spread out over 6 miles. So are we confident that the scope of that is going to be adequately addressed here?
I believe so. I mean, in terms of some of the residential discussions that we've had, the majority of people understand the safety concerns and the limiting of left turns. That, you know, once you kind of walk people through that, they go, oh yeah, I don't like to make left turns at, you know, during this period of time, or I had this close call. So that's pretty consistent. I would say more so what we heard from some of the residential folks were, you're showing event that my access is going to close here and I'm concerned about that. And I think in all of those cases, we were able to put that conditional right in, right out that says, hey, if redevelopment occurs, which, you know, is probably fairly unlikely for most of the residential properties, but you know, in some locations, I think is possible as traffic volumes continue to increase and it becomes more and more busy on Patterson Road. But you know, we've made them conditional right in, right out, so that only redevelopment triggers the closure of those access points, and that has generally met people's needs, and they feel like it. You know, they were concerned about, you know, property values and you know, a new buyer coming in and seeing that would close. And so we've tried to address that through that mechanism of a conditional right in, right out.
Thank you. And I just also want to say, I think your group's done a great job, and the staff has done an unbelievable job in trying to deal with all these concerns. So I thank everybody that was involved.
Chairman Teskey, commissioners, are there other questions that we can help with today that may help in the conversation and hearing proceedings on Tuesday night? Nope.
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Teskey. Seeing none, like you said, this is scheduled for hearing on Tuesday night. So in your agenda packet, you will certainly see all the comments and other information that has come in and support this agenda item. So certainly encourage you, if you have not already, to dig in through that. And should we receive any additional comments between now and then, we'll make sure those get posted and then emailed directly out to you as well, so that you're aware of anything else that comes in. And with that, Chairman Teskey, we'll look to you if we're ready to move on to the next topic. And just a quick thank you as well to the rest of city staff and Michelle for your time and presentation.
Indeed, thanks to everyone for that presentation on the traffic control plan. We appreciate all of your hard work on all of that. And I think we're ready to jump into this discussion. Obviously, a little bit mindful of the time here. It is already almost 1:10. So I know we have a kind of an ambitious topic to tackle here in the next 20 minutes, but hopefully we can make some progress.
Well, thanks, Chairman Teskey, members of Planning Commission. I think Tamara and I will tag team this to some extent, but hopefully everyone had a chance to glance at the draft outline that we've prepared, that we intend to refine for the March 1st City Council workshop on this topic. And really, I don't know that we're too ambitious about today. Our hope is just to take a look at the subsection B, really, of the 3 license types, which is the land use framework, and just verify one last time in advance of that March 1st meeting that this aligns with the Planning Commission's recommendation. And I can share my screen with that if that would be helpful as well. And Tamara, I don't know if you had other aims that you wanted to lay out.
I think that would be helpful, Lance, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thank you. And apologize, we got the outline out to you a little bit late, but you should have that in your inbox too if you find it more helpful to follow along on your own computer screen. Lance, as he said, hopefully this is a good summary. It's, I would say, simplified, if you will, from I think the dynamic and really fluid conversation that you all have had. So the intent being that we could encapsulate and distill down, I think, to the best of our ability, some pretty concise recommendations from you all. I do want to acknowledge that it's not nearly as colorful as the very lengthy conversation. I think some of the nuanced points, but I did want to caveat in saying that, and I believe Commissioner Gastos had alluded to this on the front end, is kind of understanding the process. And so I wanted to take a moment to just talk about that in the context of where we're at. As I believe you all know, this really came as a task to you all from City Council to help develop out the framework for land use should these uses be permitted within the city. And so this really is an effort to provide an outline and context for our City Council to, I think, mull over and ruminate upon. And then certainly this would be used, I think, as a launch point should the vote be approved for marijuana related businesses and really the repeal of the previous moratorium. Should those questions pass, then we would really start the regulatory development process based, again, as using this as a launch point for those discussions. So this is no way intended to kind of immediately transpire, evolve into a regulatory ordinance, but certainly would be used as a starting point therein. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit of the procedural components, and I'll turn now to Lance to walk you through the basic outline here.
Great, thank you, Tamara. So you'll notice that A here, section A, really is a summary of the enforcement and security requirements, really with an emphasis on summarizing state requirements. And we may see some development of local enforcement mechanisms and discussions here internally, but really those state regulations are a summary of mechanisms that are in place. So hopefully that's a good reference for you as we continue the conversation. But I'll really proceed here to stores, and before hopping down to the land use section, would highlight that we understand and will relay to City Council that really all of the recommendations as formulated here from the Planning Commission are based on the assumption that there will be a cap of licenses. And the number has been 6 in recent discussions, and I think the understanding is that that general number is, again, the kind of basis for the recommendations. Really do want to focus in on the land use framework here and use specific standards. So what we heard from you, broadly speaking on stores, was that where relevant, that the stores should be treated essentially as other high volume retail uses in terms of their zoning and in terms of standards like parking that would apply. So that's what we have here in the list of zones. That's C1, C2, B2, MU, MXS, and MXOC. And then we also have the buffering of 500 feet from schools. Based on our discussion, we had considered other uses from which to buffer and potentially a higher buffering amount, and landed on that based on a comparison largely to liquor law. And then in terms of use-specific standards, you'll notice that most of what's gestured to here is a combination of existing municipal code and state law. So signage regulations being a combination of those at the state level, as well as our existing sign code, and then the hours being those prescribed by the state and not further restricted, which the jurisdiction does have the opportunity to do. So we'll just turn it over to the commission to verify or otherwise comment on whether this aligns with the recommendation of the stage, and that's a comfortable place to move forward for a March 1st outline to council.
Lance, this is George Gotchis. I'm glad you have something in there with parking. If you, I know you saw the article. I read the article in the paper today that the Palisades, there's a retail establishment that's looking to locate closer to the interstate, and they've had, of course, Palisades much smaller than Grand Junction as far as access and public right of way, but they've had some problems. So I think that's an issue that's I'm glad you've addressed.
Can't hear. Sorry, go ahead, Tamara.
Chairman Teske, Commissioner Gassis, I was just going to respond to that a little bit with some of our information that will also be included in this outline, although certainly not in here and not for an extensive conversation. But I do think, as we've seen from the Palisade experience, there's kind of a direct nexus between the number of stores and the volume that they're managing. And so I think it's important for just to be aware. I think that's perhaps one of our larger land use concerns is when we do look at some limits that may not align directly with kind of overall demand, that those storefronts really start to manage a much higher volume than may otherwise be, I guess, managed well on a particular site. And, for example, I know we've seen stores that have had issues with traffic and I think parking, and certainly Palisade is a good example when, I largely suspect are managing a fair number of clients from the Grand Junction area. And that has created a significant demand for them. And so I think it's important to think of that volume and capacity as it relates to context, just in the numerical limits of storage fronts that may be available. And sorry to interrupt there, Commissioner Scissors. Thank you.
Nope, I interrupted you. My apologies. I just have a very quick question or point to make, Lance. In the buffering from schools, it says public and parochial. What about secular private?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Commissioner Scissors. I think the intent is to capture all of those institutions, and so that's a good language tweak that we can use to clarify. I think parochial is meant to capture not only religious, but if that's unclear, then it's likely unclear to others, and we'll be happy to clarify.
Yeah, I think the definition of parochial means of or relating to a church or something to that nature.
Thank you.
Hey, Lance and Tamara, this is Sandra. I just have a question. I don't see in here anything about buffering from other marijuana retail stores. And I thought that was a big part of what we were trying to clarify to prevent the clustering.
Commissioner Weckerly, or Tamara, go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, Commissioner Weckerly, I think that's a great question. And Lance was not at the last meeting where I think we talked about this a fair bit. I did not include it here. I did not know if there was clear resolution. What I believe I heard last time was that there may be some buffering between desirable if there were more than two stores grouped together. But I think the conversation tended to lean towards fewer buffers, knowing that we wanted to ensure that there were ample number of opportunities for businesses to locate in position or in spaces, one, that were available to them, but really relying more heavily on the cap versus a buffering tool. So if I've captured that incorrectly, by all means, let's correct that. But that's why it's not seen here.
All right, that makes sense. I'm concerned that that was one of the, from the public feedback in the workshops, that was just one of the largest concerns. From what I heard, I wasn't obviously in those meetings. Someone else could speak to that, but for the clustering. And so just to maybe even somehow address it, just to, have some language in there addressing it somehow.
I'll second that interpretation that it just seemed like we couldn't quite come up, it was too complex and couldn't quite come up with exactly what it would look like. But I think there was an agreement that there needs to be something in there about avoiding clusters. And maybe at this, like you say, this is just a planning document, maybe just getting that sentiment in there and saying that, it'll depend on the size and location of the districts and how we decide to define clustering, et cetera. But just some language about that, I think, would suffice.
Well, we further that sentiment by specifically linking it up to how the selection process goes, right? If I recall right, we kind of landed in an area where, gosh, generally this is what we think is appropriate based on the little information that we know. But one of the main concerns that are out there is the clustering of these things, and it's very challenging to not be, go over the edge on over-regulating here until we know how that selection process is going to impact how the selected applicants and or those who ultimately receive licenses, where they will choose to be at. Right, so that was one thing that kind of prompted some of those questions that I sent back in the email was, even though it may not be part of the land use framework recommendation coming from planning department or planning commission and our purview in that regard, an emphasis on how impactful the selection process.
Can I interrupt you really quick? You have a lot of static and feedback. I'm not sure if you've got a ability to change your mic.
Is this any better?
Still Darth Vader. Sorry.
I'll try another mechanism in the meantime. George, looked like you had something, right?
Well, yeah, thank you, Keith. And Andrea, to add to this discussion, when we looked at the clustering and we looked at on the map, if I remember right, we found out, as Tamara just said, that ultimately we can manage that through the capping of the number of stores at the time and in the beginning. And that seemed to be a good way of resolving that.
Right. I guess perhaps to the point I think Keith may have been making here is it seems important that the RFP selection methodology, at least to me anyway, that is described in the outline here, Lance, if you've scrolled up a little bit to the stores section, I think it's A Romanet 2 sub 4, and maybe this is sort of captured by subpoint D, other policy derived aims, in terms of the point process there. D, you can see it kind of at the bottom of the screen. That I think avoiding clustering or coming up with some methodology for scoring RFP submissions based on their physical location. I think this may be one of Keith's points in his email prior to our workshop this afternoon was the same one. Are we going to be talking about physical location as a part of the RFP? And I think, at least as I understood our conversations before this, if the answer is yes, then we feel basically the way, at least it was my understanding, that we felt basically the way that this framework outlines it about the land use framework on sub B here. But if it doesn't, and the RFP process either ignores location or the location is selected after the RFP occurs, then I think we may feel differently about that, especially with respect to buffering.
Chairman Teskey, I think that's a great way to consolidate the comments there. I'm wondering, we can address that, I think, in two ways. One, I think we can certainly make sure that we understand, and it's not in here because we don't know yet on exactly what the criteria is going to be for RFP selection, but we can certainly make note that that could be an important part to consider. And I think then secondly, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm, again, distilling incorrectly here, that there does seem to be support for making sure that there is not kind of groupings of two or more. And I think that was derived from the conversation last time, two or more stores in close proximity. And we can capture that without naming exactly the metric or exactly that tool, but we can certainly capture that thought here in the recommendations if that adequately and sufficiently addresses the concern.
Yeah, I think there was some discussion in our previous conversations about clustering, and I don't know that we necessarily landed on the two or more, meaning that the units should be one at a time to avoid groupings of two. But I think we were all generally thinking we don't want to create a green zone either officially or unofficially by having all of these locations grouped together as a result of the way that they're approved by the RFP process. Does that make sense to the rest of us in terms of the way we're thinking about it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense to me as well. If we, if it's controlled by the RFP and the location and it eliminates the potential for clustering, then, I don't think we need to add more recommendations for more restrictions, but not knowing the cap and not knowing the RFP process yet, it kind of leaves me in an area where I would like to know before too long what the cap number actually might be. That, that they're, I know we've tossed 6 around quite a few times, but it would be nice to know if that's really what we're headed towards as the suggestion or suggested number. Thanks.
So Commissioner Teskey, it sounds like we'll move forward with a kind of broader statement about implementing a mechanism to limit or prevent clustering at this stage.
I think that makes sense.
Excellent. Recognizing time, I wonder if there are any burning other critiques on land use here for stores, or whether we can step forward. Hearing none, I will scroll here to cultivations. This is distinct perhaps from the approach with products manufacturers and stores in that there was a greater deviation from the kind of broader approach to mirror non-marijuana related corollary uses here. And I think that was driven in large part by the odor concern. So here we see that the recommendation has been to go for the I1 and I2 zone districts rather than the full set of zone districts that allow for other industrial indoor uses. So let's take a moment and make sure we're all comfortable with that here at this stage. Hearing no objections, I'll keep moving on here. And here we get to products manufacturers. And this does touch on one of the questions that Keith responded with earlier this morning about the distinction between different kinds of products manufacturer uses. So remembering that the products manufacturing license covers really a wide variety of businesses, that subsequent land use regulation could speak to the distinctions between those, specifically that whereas the broad category for manufacturing would be mirrored here with that IO, I1, I2, and C2 zone districts, that any hazardous uses that are sometimes associated with some of those extraction practices would require a CUP and be limited to just the strictly industrial zone districts. So this is where we sit at this point, and I think it will be a good tool for council at this level. Again, we will circle around as we get closer to that point where we may have to develop an ordinance depending on the outcome of the vote. But our hope is that this translates the broader concerns and preferences of the Planning Commission in a way that City Council can chew on and move forward with. So that's all I have for you on the outline here.
Thank you, Lance. Commissioner Teskey, we did have a member of the public who has joined us today, I believe Ms. Renee Grossman, who has asked to provide some comments. So I will turn to you and see if you would like to open it up for public comment at this point.
I have been following along a little bit in the chat messages as well here, I think, as this was going on. So Ms. Grossman, as you know, it's not our practice to take public comment during our Planning Commission workshops. We have the opportunity for public testimony at our public hearing, which will be coming forward on this and any other matter. But since you're here and have an interest in making a comment, obviously we have also reached the end of our meeting time as well. So trying to be aware of all of those things. Happy to hear from you briefly, at least in terms of what your comments are. And we can hear you out.
Thank you very much. This is Renee Grossman. I own High Q, which is a retail marijuana company in Western Colorado. I just had kind of a question and a comment about the locations, the setbacks, the density. Obviously, the challenges are that the town doesn't control the real estate market, and the landlords need to consent to the use. So finding locations can be somewhat challenging. And so it can be difficult because as a potential applicant, we don't know where other people are planning to lease space or buy space to apply. So one thing to consider as you think about the setbacks and the RFP process is, how do you handle a situation where two people apply that happen to be close to one another because they didn't know they were close to one another? And so I don't have an answer for this. It's just a complexity to this process that I wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. We appreciate your commentary. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to review some of our previous meetings, but those concerns are things that we've been aware of in our discussions as well. And as you can probably gather from this conversation, we are sensitive to the availability of real estate stock for this type of use and trying to balance that against the city's land use considerations as we move forward with this matter. So we very much appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Yes, I participated in the working group that the town has set up.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Tamara. Well, I don't know that we have anything else on our agenda. We're out of time anyway.
Yeah, Commissioner Teskey, thank you. For those that I believe are planning on attending Tuesday at this point, I don't believe we've heard from anybody that will not be able to participate next Tuesday, but look forward to seeing you there. And we do have an agenda that was just posted during this meeting. So feel free to look through it and we will go from there. Certainly the access control plan being scheduled for the 23rd will probably take up a majority of the hearing proceedings on Tuesday. So Chairman Teskey, I don't have any additional, I do actually have one question for you. And maybe I'll defer to Bella here if I haven't captured it correctly, but our program provider for gjspeaks.org that you all have been using now for, gosh, almost a year, is actually looking to solicit some input from planning commissioners on how you're utilizing the site. And so wanted to see if there was any concern with us directly sending a survey to you from the program providers of GJ Speaks.
I don't have any objection to that. I suppose what I guess I'd suggest is if anyone does have an objection, why don't you let Tamara or Bella know that you don't want to participate, but otherwise we'll assume it's okay.
That sounds great. We will also follow up with a second email. I know many of you are looking for prompts for meeting agendas and other information, both on your personal as well as your city email. We will follow up in an email. If you would like us to add your personal email to GJ Speaks notifications, we can do so, but we will look for you for guidance on how you would like to receive those. So, Chairman Teske, I think that is finally it from me.
Sounds good, Tamara. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for your participation today, and we'll see each other again on Tuesday.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.